Have you ever settled into your seat on final approach and let your mind drift? The city lights spread below you, the engines pulling back to a low hum, the gentle buffet of the wind as the runway reaches up to meet the wheels. It is one of the most routine moments in modern travel. Most people have done it dozens of times and thought nothing of it. The 127 passengers and 5 crew members aboard USAir Flight 427 were doing exactly that on the evening of September 8, 1994. The sky over Pittsburgh was clear. The weather was benign. The crew was experienced. The aircraft, a 7-year-old Boeing 737-300, had given no indication of any trouble. They were minutes from landing. What happened in the next 28 seconds would kill all 132 people aboard, leave investigators baffled for nearly 5 years, uncover a hidden flaw embedded in thousands of aircraft flying worldwide, and force a reckoning between Boeing, the airlines, the regulator, and the families of the dead that would reshape aviation safety for generations. By September of 1994, USAir was one of the dominant carriers on the eastern seaboard. Pittsburgh International Airport was its single largest hub. The aircraft allocated to Flight 427 was a Boeing 737-300, what the industry calls a classic, delivered to USAir in October of 1987. At the time of the accident, it had accumulated approximately 16,800 flight hours and over 18,000 takeoff and landing cycles. Mature and well-used, but not old or neglected. The 737 family was, and remains, the best-selling commercial jetliner in history, and by 1994 was considered, without significant qualification, one of the safest aircraft ever built. Flight 427 was a scheduled service from Chicago O'Hare to Palm Beach, with a stopover at Pittsburgh. The passengers were ordinary: business travelers, families, Pittsburgh area residents coming home, a family of 5 from the suburb of Upper St. Clair, by any measure a routine Thursday afternoon flight. In the left-hand seat sat Captain Peter Germano, 45 years old, a solid professional with no history of incidents and approximately 12,000 total flying hours, of which over 4,000 were on the 737. In the right-hand seat was First Officer Charles Emmett III, 38, with 9,119 total hours and 3,644 on the 737 alone. These were not novices. The cockpit voice recorder would later confirm that before the crisis began, they were talking pleasantly about the food a flight attendant had just brought them. Flight 427 began its descent toward Pittsburgh in the early evening. Conditions were unremarkable: clear skies, visibility well above minimums. Among the aircraft being vectored toward the airport ahead of Flight 427 was Delta Airlines Flight 1083, a Boeing 727 on the same approach path to runway 28 right. At approximately 7:03 p.m., as Flight 427 was completing a left bank to align with its assigned heading and the Delta 727 was approximately 4.1 miles ahead, something went wrong. The flight data recorder showed an abrupt, uncommanded heading change to the left. The nose swung sharply. The aircraft rolled. The bank increased rapidly beyond 30 degrees, then beyond 60. The rate of descent surged. In the final seconds, the 737 was in a near vertical dive, rolling through inverted flight before the nose dropped to 80 degrees below the horizon. The aircraft struck the ground at 261 knots. Recovery had been impossible from the moment the upset began. Investigators later calculated that the crew had just 10 seconds from the onset of the roll to troubleshoot and act before the situation became unrecoverable. The cockpit voice recorder captured what followed. Captain Germano, his voice first steady, then urgent. "Hang on. Oh, expletive. What the hell is this? What the, oh God, 427 emergency." A scream. Then pull. Then silence. At 7:03 and 23 seconds p.m., the aircraft struck a wooded hillside near the Green Garden Plaza in Hopewell Township, Beaver County, Pennsylvania, approximately 6 miles northwest of Pittsburgh International Airport. When the first emergency responders arrived, they found something that stopped them in their tracks. There was no aircraft. There were pieces, scattered across a debris field hundreds of feet wide, through trees and undergrowth, on the ground and in the branches above it. Only the tail section remained in anything approaching an identifiable shape. Everything else had been obliterated. Jim Eichenlaub, Hopewell Township's Director of Emergency Services, described it simply: "Usually when a plane crashes, there is some large section left. That did not happen here. Everything was very small pieces. The fragmentation was so severe that the NTSB, for the first time in its history, required its investigators to wear full-body biohazard suits while working the scene. More than 2,000 body bags were ultimately used for the 6,000 separate human remains recovered from the site. All 132 people aboard were killed. It remains the deadliest aviation accident in the history of Pennsylvania. The investigation and a hidden pattern. The NTSB launched its investigation immediately. The flight data recorder yielded a detailed picture of the final seconds, but lacked one crucial piece of data: the position of the rudder pedals. Regulations in 1994 required flight data recorders to capture 13 parameters. Rudder pedal position was not among them. What the data did show, the abrupt uncommanded turn to the left, the roll, the rate of descent, pointed investigators immediately toward the rudder. An uncommanded full deflection of the rudder would produce exactly this sequence of events. But without pedal data, investigators could not definitively rule out the alternative: that one of the pilots had inadvertently applied the wrong rudder input in reaction to wake turbulence from the Delta 727 ahead. This single ambiguity, rudder malfunction or pilot error, would divide the investigation for years. It became the second longest aviation crash investigation in NTSB history. What gave the investigation its deepest significance was that Flight 427 was not the first time something like this had happened. On March 3, 1991, 3.5 years before Pittsburgh, United Airlines Flight 585 had fallen from the sky near Colorado Springs under nearly identical circumstances: a 737 on approach, clear weather, experienced crew, an abrupt, uncommanded roll to the left, a dive, no survivors, 25 people killed. The NTSB had investigated Flight 585 for years without reaching a definitive conclusion, classifying the probable cause as either a localized weather phenomenon common in Colorado's mountainous terrain or a possible rudder or yaw damper malfunction, undetermined. A deeply unsatisfying conclusion, but without better data and without a comparable second event, there was nowhere further to go. Now there was a second event. Same aircraft type, same directional roll, same catastrophic outcome. Then, on June 9, 1996, while the Pittsburgh investigation was still ongoing, an Eastwind Airlines 737 crew near Richmond, Virginia, experienced an abrupt, uncommanded roll at low altitude. Unlike the crews of Flights 585 and 427, they had sufficient altitude to recover. They landed safely. The pilot's testimony about what the aircraft had done, about the direction of the roll relative to their inputs, how the pedals had felt, gave investigators for the first time a live account of rudder reversal from people who had survived it. 3 Boeing 737s, 3 identical upsets. One explanation. The rudder of the Boeing 737 is controlled by a component called the Main Rudder Power Control Unit, the PCU. Inside this unit is a servo valve, a precision-machined assembly that translates the pilot's pedal inputs into hydraulic pressure, which moves the rudder surface. Under normal conditions, the system works flawlessly. But the NTSB, working with independent engineers and the manufacturer, identified a specific failure mode that could occur under particular temperature and pressure conditions. If the secondary slide of the servo valve jammed against the valve housing in a specific displaced position, arising from extreme cold or manufacturing tolerances, the primary slide could then travel in the direction opposite to the pilot's command. The mechanism worked like this. The pilot pushes the right rudder pedal to correct a roll. The jammed secondary slide causes the primary slide to interpret the input in reverse. The rudder deflects not right but hard left, to its blowdown limit, its maximum possible deflection. And critically, the harder the pilot pushes the pedal to correct, the further in the wrong direction the rudder moves. There was no way for the crew to know this was happening. No warning light, no system alarm. The pedals gave no feedback that the rudder was doing the opposite of what was commanded. Investigators established that at the airspeed at which Flight 427 was flying, approximately 190 knots, the ailerons and spoilers were insufficient to counteract a fully deflected rudder. This was a threshold the manufacturer had never communicated to operators. It was called the crossover speed, the point below which a hard-over rudder cannot be overcome by any lateral control input available to the crew. The pilots had pulled back on the control column throughout the upset, a natural instinct in a diving aircraft. This raised the angle of attack, removed what remained of aileron authority, and caused an aerodynamic stall on top of an already unrecoverable roll. They were not flying badly. They were flying by every instinct and training protocol available to them. None of it was enough, because none of it had been designed for this. The period from 1994 to 1999 was not simply a technical investigation. It was a prolonged and at times bitter confrontation between the families of the dead, the airline, the manufacturer, and the regulator. Boeing maintained with considerable force throughout the early years that the most likely explanation was pilot error, that one of the crew had inadvertently applied the wrong pedal in reaction to wake turbulence. The absence of rudder pedal data made it impossible to definitively disprove. USAir and the Airline Pilots Association took the opposing view. A rudder malfunction was the only explanation consistent with the established facts and the pattern across 3 separate aircraft. The families of the 132 people killed found themselves in the middle of this institutional argument. Many had received no meaningful communication from USAir in the immediate aftermath. Notification of deaths had been handled inconsistently. Briefings on the investigation's progress were infrequent, and families felt evasive. The experience of navigating the aftermath of a major aviation disaster, they discovered, had no formal structure and no guaranteed rights. Their response was to organize. Family advocacy groups met with legislators and petitioned Congress. Their efforts contributed directly to the passage of the Aviation Disaster Family Assistance Act of 1996, which for the first time established legal standards for airline notification of next of kin, access to investigation briefings, grief counseling, and the handling of personal effects. A reform forced from grief that would go on to protect every family of every future aviation disaster in the United States. On March 24, 1999, 4 years, 6 months, and 16 days after the crash, the NTSB issued its final report. The probable cause was a loss of control resulting from the movement of the rudder surface to its blowdown limit, deflecting opposite to the direction commanded by the pilots due to a jam of the servo valve secondary slide combined with overtravel of the primary slide. The crew had not made a fundamental error. The aircraft had failed them in a way they could not have known to anticipate, and in a way no one had trained them to handle. The same determination was simultaneously applied to United Airlines Flight 585. The Colorado Springs crash, officially unsolved for 8 years, was resolved by the Pittsburgh investigation. One disaster had solved another. Boeing was required to redesign the rudder control system on the 737 to eliminate the possibility of reversal. The modification was applied to more than 2,800 aircraft worldwide. Boeing bore the cost. In 2016, former crash investigator John Cox noted that the subsequent absence of any rudder reversal incident had confirmed the NTSB's findings were correct. The FAA mandated that new flight data recorders capture a minimum of 17 parameters rather than 13, with rudder pedal position now among them. Pilot training was updated worldwide. Specific guidance developed for responding to a suspected rudder jam, a scenario that had not previously featured in simulator training because it had not been recognized as a realistic failure mode. The crash of USAir Flight 427 was not caused by a negligent crew. It was not caused by a reckless airline. It was caused by a design flaw, a specific, identifiable, correctable failure mode in a precision hydraulic component that had gone undetected through years of certification testing, regulatory oversight, and operational service. The 737 had flown millions of sectors without incident, not because the flaw did not exist, but because the precise combination of conditions required to trigger it had not, until Colorado Springs, occurred in a fatal and documented way. 2 crews died before the pattern was recognized, a third barely survived and provided the testimony that confirmed it. The 132 names on the memorial at the crash site in Hopewell Township include business people and families, the young and the old. Among them a family of 5 from Upper St. Clair, who did not come home from what should have been an ordinary Thursday flight. They did not die because someone ignored a warning. They died because a flaw existed that nobody yet knew was there, and because, at 6,000 feet above Pittsburgh on a clear September evening, they happened to be aboard the flight on which it finally revealed itself. Every Boeing 737 that takes off today does so with a redesigned rudder system. Every crash investigation captures rudder pedal position data. Every family of an aviation disaster victim has legally guaranteed rights to notification and information. Every pilot training on a 737 practices the response to a jammed rudder in the simulator. All of that came from 28 seconds over Pittsburgh. If you found this documentary valuable, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and I will meet you with another story soon.